You ruined my day! Look at this! Do you have any idea? Come out! Get out of the car! No!
I'm so sorry, it was an accident.
Sorry? You ruined my day! Look at my suit! Hell no, the devil is testing my patience today.
I apologize, I was blinded by your beauty. I was mesmerized by your aura. There's no word to describe how you are. I apologize, I was blinded by your beauty. Your eyes need a religion of their own because they should be worshipped. Hi, it's West again, creator of Soul Noir Stories. You know we tell stories like no other person does. Grab your popcorns and enjoy this one.
I don't leave anything to chance. Not today. My alarm went off at 5 a.m. I pressed my suit the night before, laid out my heels, rehearsed my pitch until the words stopped feeling like words and started feeling like weapons. Yoon Automobile Group is the account that changes everything, and I have exactly one shot at walking through that door as the right person for the job. 3 blocks out. Flawless. Early. I hear the engine before I see the car. A Mercedes G-Wagon, moving way too fast for a wet street. And then the world goes cold and dark and disgusting all at once. Chicago gutter water, straight to the chest. I look down at my suit. My custom suit. The one I saved 4 months to afford. Something in me goes very, very still. I don't cry. I don't panic. I walk straight to that tinted window and I knock. What I don't know yet is that the man sitting behind that glass has been watching my career for months. And he hit that puddle on purpose. And that's how it starts. A destroyed suit, a dangerous man, and a woman too brilliant to run even when she probably should. If you're here for corporate power plays wrapped in criminal secrets, protective men who are absolutely a problem, and a woman who refuses to flinch even with a gun in the room, you already know this is your home. So tell me, are you sneaking this in at work with your screen dimmed low, curled up somewhere you're supposed to be sleeping, or making your commute feel like something worth showing up for? Drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to know the wonderful locations of my beautiful story lovers today.
Hi, I'm Danae and I'm one of the writers of this great channel, Soul Noir Stories. Could you tell me what you enjoyed most in this particular video? Now let's get back to our video.
I bought it on a Tuesday in March, during my lunch break, with money I had been quietly setting aside for 6 months. It wasn't impulsive. Nothing I do is impulsive. I had researched the brand, tracked the price, waited for the right moment, and when I finally walked out of that boutique with the garment bag folded over my arm, something settled in my chest that felt dangerously close to peace. A custom-cut cobalt blue power suit, double-breasted, structured shoulders, the kind of silhouette that enters a room slightly before you do. I knew what I was buying. Not fabric, armor. The Yoon Automobile Group interview had been 6 weeks in the making. 3 rounds of vetting, 2 background checks, 1 intimidating call with their head of corporate affairs who spoke in clipped half-sentences like her time was literally currency. I had prepared a full market entry deck, a 3-tier brand repositioning strategy, and a 90-day onboarding blueprint they never even asked for. I prepared it anyway. That's who I am. Kendra Decker does not walk into rooms empty-handed. My alarm went off at 5 a.m. I pressed the suit the night before. Laid out my heels, black, structured, 2 inches, professional without apology. Rehearsed my pitch in the bathroom mirror until the words stopped living in my throat and moved into my bones where they belonged. By 7:30, I was eating a breakfast I barely tasted, running through objection scenarios in my head the way other people run through song lyrics. By 8:30, I was 3 blocks from the Yoon Tower. Early. Calm. Exactly where I needed to be. The rain had let up overnight, but the streets were still slick and dark, the kind of wet that makes Chicago look like a city in a movie about itself. I walked with purpose. Measured steps. Chin level. Bag close, because the last thing a black woman walking into a CEO suite needs is to look like she's rushing. I heard it before I saw it. The engine. Low and expensive and moving entirely too fast for a rain-soaked street at 8:45 in the morning. I registered the sound a half-second before my body had time to step back, and by then it was already happening. A midnight black Mercedes G-Wagon hit the pothole at the edge of the curb like it was specifically placed there by the universe to ruin my life. The water came up in a wave. Cold. Dark. Immediate. It hit me across the chest, and up the left side of my face, and I stood there on the sidewalk absolutely still, The way you go still when your brain refuses to process what just happened to your body. I looked down slowly. The suit, my armor, was soaked through in a diagonal slash of Chicago street water, gritty and brown and completely catastrophically real. 4 months of savings, 6 weeks of preparation, 1 morning to make the impression of my life. Something moved through me then. Not panic, not tears, something quieter and considerably more dangerous than either of those things. I walked to the car, reached up, and knocked on that tinted window with 3 firm, unhurried knocks. I had things to say. The window came down slowly, deliberately, like whoever was on the other side had all the time in the world and wanted me to know it. I didn't wait for an introduction. I told him exactly what I thought about people who drive like the road belongs to them. I told him what that suit cost. Not the number, but the weight of it, the months of discipline folded into every seam. I told him that wealth without consideration wasn't sophistication, it was just money with bad manners. I was precise. I was controlled. I did not raise my voice once because I have never needed volume to make a point land. He didn't interrupt, didn't flinch, didn't offer an apology either. He just watched me with dark, unhurried eyes and the faintest trace of something at the corner of his mouth that I refused to dignify by calling a smile. I walked away. A woman at the corner coffee cart handed me a stack of napkins without a word, the particular solidarity of strangers, and I spent the next 8 minutes in a bathroom on the ground floor of the Yoon Tower trying to perform a miracle on a suit that was well beyond saving. I blotted. I repositioned my lapel. I reapplied. I stood in front of that mirror and made a decision that the story of this interview would not be the water. It would be what I did after. I took the elevator to the 34th floor at 9:02 a.m., 2 minutes late. The first time I had been late to anything in 3 years, and it landed in my chest like a small, sharp stone. The assistant at the front desk gave me a sympathetic look that I did not want and directed me down a hallway lined with industry awards and framed architectural renderings of Yoon dealerships across 7 states. A legitimate empire, no question, which was exactly why I had wanted this account so badly. The conference room door was open. I walked in with my chin level and my portfolio in hand and my expression arranged into the particular brand of composed authority I had spent a decade building, and I found the chair at the head of a long table and the man sitting in it. The same dark, unhurried eyes, the same almost smile, the G-Wagon, the pothole, the window coming down like he had all the time in the world. Cho Yoon, CEO of Yoon Automobile Group, leaned back in his chair and looked at me the way a man looks at something he has been waiting on for a very long time. "Ms. Decker," he said, "you're late." The room had 2 other people in it. I did not see them. I heard my own heartbeat once, very clearly, and then I made the only decision available to a woman who has never once let a room see her stumble. I walked to the opposite end of the table, set my portfolio down without a sound, and pulled out my chair. "The street conditions this morning were unpredictable," I said. "I'll account for that next time." He said nothing for a moment, just looked at me with those eyes that already knew too much. "Next time," he repeated quietly, like he was tasting the words, like he liked them. I opened my portfolio and began. He let the interview run 40 minutes over. Not because I was struggling, I wasn't. The deck landed exactly the way I designed it to, clean and precise, and 3 steps ahead of every question his team threw at me. I had answers for things they hadn't thought to ask yet. I watched the 2 executives on either side of him take notes with the quiet urgency of people who already knew they were looking at the right candidate. Cho Yoon took no notes. He just watched me, steady, unblinking, with that particular quality of attention that makes you feel simultaneously studied and seen in a way that has nothing to do with the boardroom and everything to do with something you can't name and shouldn't entertain. When it was over, his team stood. Hands were shaken. Professional pleasantries exchanged. I was gathering my portfolio when I heard the door close and realized with a slow, careful breath that the other 2 had left and he hadn't. "I owe you a suit," he said. "You owe me nothing," I said without turning around. "Your assistant can follow up with my agency regarding next steps." "Kendra!" The use of my first name was deliberate, and we both knew it. I turned because not turning would have been its own kind of acknowledgement. He was standing at the window now, the Chicago skyline spread out behind him like it had been specifically arranged for his background, the gray morning light catching the sharp architecture of his face. He had changed out of whatever he'd been wearing in the car. Dark suit now. Perfectly cut. The kind of effortless that costs a significant amount of effort. I wasn't going to call you Kendra, I said. We haven't established that. Have breakfast with me. I have at 12 o'clock. It's 10:15. I looked at him for a moment. He looked back with the patience of someone who had already decided how this was going to go and was simply waiting for me to arrive at the same conclusion. This would be inappropriate, I said. You came in here wearing Chicago Street water on a custom suit and gave the sharpest market entry presentation my team has seen in 4 years, he said. I don't think either of us is particularly interested in appropriate. That almost smile again. The one I refused to name. 1 hour, I said. And you're not buying me a new suit. He bought me 3. We didn't make it to breakfast immediately, because he redirected us to a boutique 2 blocks from the tower with the quiet confidence of a man who had clearly already looked up where it was before the conversation happened. I stood in the middle of the shop with my arms crossed while he spoke to the stylist in the particular low register of someone accustomed to having requests fulfilled without repetition. You planned this, I said. I saw an opportunity, he said, examining a blazer with the focus of someone who took fabric seriously. That's not a denial. No, he agreed. It isn't. I wanted to be angry about it. I had the architecture of the argument fully constructed in my head. The presumption, the overreach, the casual assumption that I could be managed by charm and a corporate card. But he handed me a cobalt blazer in almost the exact shade of the ruined suit. And when I looked at it, something moved quietly through my chest that I immediately filed away in the cabinet I keep locked. Over breakfast, he was different. Still watchful. But the boardroom formality fell away, and what replaced it was something more unsettling, genuine curiosity. He asked about my work the way people ask about something they already respect. He listened the way people listen when they're not waiting for their own turn to speak. I left 2 hours later with 3 garment bags, a business card with his personal number written on the back in clean, deliberate ink, and the distinct and uncomfortable awareness that I was already in trouble. He texted at 7:43 the next morning. Not a good morning. Not a follow-up about the role. Just, we're the gray one today. I stared at it for longer than I should have. Then I put my phone face down on the counter and made coffee with the focused deliberateness of a woman actively choosing not to respond to something that had no business making her feel anything. I wore the gray one. I told myself it was because it was the most appropriate for the Wednesday client call I had at noon. I told myself this with full conviction and only moderate honesty. He was waiting in the lobby of the Yoon Tower when I arrived for our agreed strategy session at 9 a.m. Not at his desk, not in the conference room, the lobby, standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows with a coffee that had clearly been bought for me, because he was holding 2 and extended one the moment he saw me without ceremony or fanfare, the way people offer things they were certain you'd want before you knew you wanted them. I took it. I said nothing about the text. He said nothing about it either. The strategy session ran 3 hours. It was supposed to run 1. His team rotated in and out, but Chris stayed fixed. And somewhere in the second hour, the dynamic shifted in a way I felt in my sternum before I had language for it. We stopped performing for the room. We started talking to each other, finishing the logic of each other's sentences, pushing back with the easy friction of 2 people who think at a similar speed and find it rare enough to be interesting. It was after his team filed out for lunch that he said it. I was reviewing campaign metrics at the far end of the table, making notes in the margin of a printout, when I became aware of the particular quality of silence that means someone is looking at you with their full attention. I looked up. Chris was watching me with an expression I hadn't seen on him yet. Something had moved beneath the surface of the composure. Something unguarded. You pray? He asked. I blinked. Excuse me. Some people, when they walk into a room, it changes. Not because they're loud, because they're certain. He paused. You walk in like someone who has already spoken to God about it and received confirmation. I held his gaze for a careful moment. That's an unusual thing to say to someone you're considering hiring. I've already decided to hire you, he said simply. This isn't that. The air in the room did something I wasn't prepared for. I set my pen down. Then what is it? I asked. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, and looked at me with the kind of directness that bypasses every professional wall you've spent years constructing and lands somewhere entirely more personal. I've read your performance reviews, he said. 3 companies, 11 years. Every manager uses a different word, but they're all describing the same thing. Dangerous. Not threatening. Dangerous the way a precise thing is dangerous. Like a surgical instrument. He paused. I wanted to see it before I let you into my world. That's why I was on that street. That's why I hit the puddle. The room was very quiet. I absorbed this information with the controlled stillness of a woman who has trained herself not to react to things before she has fully understood them. My first instinct was fury, clean, righteous, entirely justified. He had orchestrated it. The pothole, the window, all of it. But underneath the fury, if I was being precise about it, was something else entirely. Something that felt uncomfortably like being known. Like someone had looked directly at the thing I worked hardest to conceal, the relentless, consuming drive of it, and instead of finding it too much, had called it sacred. I picked my pen back up. You could have just called my references, I said. The almost smile became a real one for the first time. It was, unfortunately, devastating. Where's the fire in that? He said. Here's what I know about you. You didn't skip. You stayed for every word. You felt the fountain scene. You felt the lobby. You felt that tension land like a stone in still water. People like you are exactly who this channel exists for. Subscribe right now, the bell, the whole thing, and tell me in the comments, what do you think that midnight phone call means? I have a theory. Let's talk. The City Hall pitch was in 3 weeks, and we were already fighting about it. Not loudly. Cho Yoon didn't do loud. Neither did I. What we did was sit across from each other in the 34th floor conference room with our respective positions fully loaded and exchange disagreements with the precise, controlled energy of two people who respected each other too much to be careless, but not enough to concede without a fight. The issue was the community reinvestment narrative. My strategy was built on transparency. A full public account of the Yoon Group's transition from privately held family enterprise to civic-facing corporate partner, complete with the charitable foundation commitments, the local hiring quotas, the environmental retrofits on the South Side dealership. Clean. Documentable. The kind of pitch that wins City Hall rooms because it gives politicians something they can stand behind without needing to understand the details. Chris wanted to keep the family history out of it entirely. We lead with the numbers, he said, for the third time in 40 minutes. Revenue projections, job creation, infrastructure investment. That's what the aldermen care about. The aldermen care about not being surprised, I said, for the third time in 40 minutes. If anything surfaces during the vetting process that contradicts the narrative we've built, the entire pitch collapses. You don't get a second meeting. Nothing will surface. I looked at him steadily. You can't promise me that. Something moved behind his eyes. A door closing. I'm telling you it won't. And I'm telling you that's not the same thing. The silence between us was the particular kind that happens when two people are arguing about something on the surface, while the real argument lives one layer underneath. He knew his family history better than I did. I knew campaign architecture better than he did. But what neither of us was saying directly was that the more I learned about the Yoon Group's origins, the more I understood that the distance between what this company was and what he needed it to become was not a marketing problem. It was a survival problem. I leaned forward. Chris, I can build you a narrative that is completely true, completely compelling, and completely clean. But I need you to trust me with the full picture. Not the version that's already been approved for public consumption. The real one. He was quiet for a long moment. The city moved 34 floors below us, indifferent and constant. Some parts of the picture, he said finally, quietly, are not mine to share yet. It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in 2 weeks. I recognized it as such and chose not to push. Instead, I pulled the revised deck across the table and uncapped my pen. Then we build around what you can give me, I said. But when the rest becomes available, I need it immediately. Not filtered, not managed. All of it. He looked at me for a moment with that unguarded expression I was beginning to recognize, the one that appeared when I did something he hadn't fully predicted. Agreed, he said. We worked until 9 p.m. When I finally gathered my things and rode the elevator down alone, I stood in the mirrored doors and looked at my own reflection and acknowledged, quietly and without drama, that I was insignificantly deeper than I had planned to be. I smelled her perfume before I saw her. Heavy. Expensive. The kind of fragrance that announces itself 3 seconds before the person wearing it arrives. designed less for pleasure than for territorial declaration. I was stepping off the elevator on the 34th floor at 8:55 a.m. on a Thursday when the scent hit me, and I registered it the way you register a change in weather. Not yet a storm, but the particular quality of air that precedes one. She was standing at the reception desk with the proprietary ease of someone who had stood there many times before. Tall, immaculate, dressed in a cream silk blouse that probably cost more than most people's rent, with a specific brand of beauty that is fully aware of itself, and wields that awareness like a card held permanently in the hand. She turned when she heard the elevator and looked at me with dark, assessing eyes that performed a full evaluation in approximately 1 second and arrived at a conclusion I could read clearly even from across the room. "So this is her. You must be the consultant," she said, the word consultant doing a particular kind of work in her mouth. "Kendra Decker," I said, and walked toward the desk with my hand extended because I was raised with manners, and I deploy them most precisely when someone is attempting to make me feel small. She shook it with the tips of her fingers. "Kim SOSO. I'm a longtime friend of the family. Longtime friend of the family." For words arranged in a sequence designed to communicate everything except their literal meaning. I received them without expression. "Lovely to meet you," I said. Chris appeared from the hallway 20 seconds later, and the temperature of the room changed in a way that told me everything the introductions had been too polished to reveal. His composure locked into place the way composure does when it's being actively maintained rather than naturally inhabited. He greeted her by name with the measured warmth of someone navigating a conversation they had been hoping to postpone. Kim SOSO watched him the way a woman watches something she still considers hers. She stayed for 40 minutes. A drop-in, she called it, with a small smile in my direction that was designed to look pleasant and functioned as its opposite. She inserted herself into the edge of our morning briefing with effortless social precision, asking questions that were perfectly reasonable on the surface and pointed as a letter opener underneath. Questions about my background, my previous clients, how long I'd be embedded with the Yoon team. How long, specifically? Twice. Chris answered for me the second time, his voice carrying a quiet finality that closed the subject like a file drawer. She received it with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and excused herself shortly after with the grace of a woman who never lets anyone see her leave angry. When the elevator doors closed behind her, the room exhaled. I opened my laptop. "Old girlfriend," I said. Not a question. Chris was quiet for a beat. Complicated history. Most histories with that particular perfume tend to be. Something loosened slightly in his expression. Not quite a smile, but the territory adjacent to one. He pulled out his chair and sat down. "She's not a concern," he said. I thought about the way she'd looked at me when she said consultant. The way she'd asked how long twice with perfectly calibrated casualness. The way she'd watched him with the specific hunger of a woman who had decided that whatever she'd lost was not yet permanently gone. I typed the first line of the day's agenda. "She absolutely is," I said pleasantly. "But we can talk about that later." He looked at me across the table with an expression that was equal parts respect and the particular helpless quality of a man who has just realized that the woman sitting across from him sees everything. He didn't argue. I found the file on a Wednesday evening when I was alone in the office and wasn't looking for it. That's the thing about truth. It rarely arrives through the front door. It slips in through the side, tucked inside something ordinary, wearing the face of a misfiled document or an unlocked drawer or a conversation that ends one sentence too early. I had stayed late to finalize the revised pitch deck, the building mostly emptied out, the Chicago skyline doing its slow transition from gray to amber outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. I was pulling a previous year's corporate filing from the shared drive to cross-reference revenue figures when I opened the wrong folder. The documents inside were not financial projections. I sat very still for a moment. Then I read them. It took 40 minutes to get through what was there, not because the language was complex, but because I kept stopping, setting my hands flat on the desk, and making myself breathe before continuing. Shell companies folded inside holding companies folded inside legitimate subsidiaries, each layer thinner than the last, the whole architecture designed to create distance between the Yoon Group's current corporate identity and the business it had been 15 years ago. Import contracts that didn't bear examination. Logistics routes through 3 countries with no plausible commercial rationale. Names that appeared once and never again, attached to transactions that had been scrubbed but not thoroughly enough. And at the center of all of it, consistent across a decade of documents, a name I didn't recognize. Hyun. I closed the folder. I sat in the amber-lit silence of the 34th floor and I looked at the city, and I had a very honest conversation with myself about what I was doing and what it was costing, and whether the two things were still in proportion. I had told myself this was an account, a campaign, a career-defining pitch that would cement my reputation and open the next chapter of my professional life. I had told myself that Cho Yoon was a complicated man in the process of becoming a legitimate one, and that the distance between those two things was exactly the kind of gap that a precise, strategic mind could help close. What I had not fully accounted for was the size of what he was moving away from. I heard the elevator at 8:47 p.m. Chris walked in still in his jacket, tie loosened by exactly 1 inch, carrying the particular energy of a man who had been in difficult conversations all day and was holding the residue of them in his jaw. He stopped when he saw me, read my face the way he always read my face, quickly, completely, without performance. He looked at the screen, then back at me. "How long have you been sitting there?" he asked. "Long enough," I said. He crossed the room and sat in the chair beside me rather than across from me, which told me something. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor for a moment with the specific posture of a man preparing to say something true. "My father built this company in 2 halves, he said quietly. "The half that's in the annual report, and the half that isn't." He paused. "I've spent 7 years trying to collapse the second half without destroying the first. He stopped. "It's not a clean process." "Hyun," I said. His jaw tightened. He was my father's partner. He believes the transition is a betrayal. He's been. Another pause, carefully measured, applying pressure. What kind of pressure? He looked at me, then with eyes that had moved past the almost smile, past the boardroom composure, past every layer of the man I'd been watching perform control for 3 weeks. What was underneath was something older and considerably more tired. "The kind that doesn't go through lawyers," he said. I absorbed this, filed it, felt something rearrange itself quietly in my chest. Not fear exactly, but the specific gravity of a situation revealing its true weight after weeks of holding it at arm's length. "You should have told me," I said. "I know. I can't build a clean campaign around a dirty foundation I don't fully understand. I know that too." The city glittered below us, indifferent and vast. I closed the laptop. "Tell me everything," I said. "From the beginning. All of it." He did. It took 2 hours. By the time he finished, the amber had gone out of the skyline and the city was pure black and light, and I understood with complete clarity that the account I had walked in to win 3 weeks ago had become something else entirely, something I couldn't put in a deck or bill by the hour, something that had wrapped itself quietly around the architecture of my days and was no longer interested in being professional or temporary or contained. I didn't say that part out loud. Instead, I reopened my laptop and said, "We're going to need a different strategy." He looked at me for a long moment with something in his expression I hadn't seen before and couldn't fully name. "You're not leaving," he said. Not a question. Something closer to wonder. "I don't leave things unfinished," I said. "Don't let the algorithm decide whether you come back. You do that. Right now. Hit subscribe, turn on the bell, and take control of your own story diet. No more missing releases. No more finding out 3 days late that a new video dropped. You're part of this now. Act like it. And while you're down there in the comments, tell me your favorite line from this entire story. Mine might surprise you. The first time I noticed I was being followed, I told myself I was paranoid. The second time, I told myself it was coincidence. The same gray sedan 2 mornings in a row on my route from the parking garage to the Yoon Tower, idling at the corner with its engine running, and its windows the particular shade of dark that means someone has paid for that specific option. The third time, I stopped telling myself anything and started paying attention. It was a Tuesday. I had just finished a solo site visit to the South Side dealership, reviewing the space for the community investment photo documentation we needed for the pitch. I was walking back to my car through the rear lot, the afternoon going cold and flat around me, when I became aware of footsteps behind me with the particular quality of footsteps that are trying not to be heard. I didn't stop, didn't turn. I kept my pace even and my chin level, and I reached my car, got in, locked the door in one fluid motion, and sat very still with my hands in my lap. The footsteps stopped. I looked in the rearview mirror. A man stood at the far edge of the lot, broad, still, dressed in dark clothing, watching my car with the dispassionate focus of someone performing a task rather than making a decision. We held that distance for 10 seconds. Then he turned and walked away with the unhurried ease of a person who wanted me to understand that leaving was his choice. I called Chris before I reached the end of the block. He picked up on the first ring, which told me he had been waiting for exactly this call. "You know," I said. "I suspected," he said. "How long?" 3 days confirmed. Possibly longer. I merged onto the expressway and checked my mirrors twice. Who is he? One of Don Hyun's people. His voice had that locked quality I'd learned to recognize, the one that meant he was managing something dangerous with the same composure he brought to quarterly reviews, because it was the only tool he trusted completely. He's sending a message. What kind of message? The kind that says he knows you matter to me. The expressway moved around me, ordinary and indifferent. I let that sentence sit for a moment without touching it. "This is escalating," I said. "Yes. Does your security team know?" "They do now." I drove for a moment in silence, the city unspooling on either side of the expressway in its usual gray magnificence. I thought about the folder, the shell companies, the import routes, the name Don Hyun appearing at the center of everything like a splinter buried too deep to remove cleanly. "He's going to move before the City Hall pitch," I said. It wasn't intuition exactly, it was the logic of the situation made visible. A man applying pressure doesn't wait for his target to achieve legitimacy. The pitch was Don Hyun's deadline as much as ours. "That's what I believe," Chris said quietly. "Then we need to accelerate the timeline on the community documentation. Get everything filed and on record before the presentation. If his play is to expose the family history publicly, we remove the weapon by getting ahead of the narrative ourselves." I paused. "Which means you need to authorize the disclosure strategy we've been arguing about for 2 weeks. A long silence. "Chris, I hear you," he said. "This isn't about the campaign anymore." "I know what it's about," he said, and the way he said it, low and deliberate and stripped of all the performance, made something move through my chest that I didn't have time to examine on an expressway at 4:30 in the afternoon. "I'll have a revised brief on your desk by morning," I said. "Kendra." He said my name the way he always said it, like it was a decision. "Be careful tonight. My driver will follow you home." I should have argued. The independent, rigidly self-sufficient part of me that had been navigating everything alone for 11 years assembled the objection immediately. "I didn't make it." "Fine," I said. I checked my mirror one more time. A black car, 3 lengths back. Steady. Present. For the first time in 3 days, I let my shoulders drop exactly 1 inch and kept driving. The revised brief took 4 hours to write and cost me a night's sleep I couldn't afford. Not because the strategy was difficult. I had been building toward this version of it for 2 weeks, assembling the pieces quietly in the margins of every conversation Chris and I had avoided finishing. The disclosure framework, the sequenced media rollout, the community partnership announcements timed to land 48 hours before the City Hall presentation, giving the narrative enough oxygen to breathe before anyone had a chance to set it on fire. What cost me the sleep was the paragraph on Don Hyun. I wrote it 6 times, deleted it 5. The 6th version stayed because it was precise without being reckless. A single section, carefully worded, acknowledging that the Yoon Group's transition from its founding structure to its current corporate identity had involved the dissolution of certain legacy partnerships, and that this dissolution had not been without friction. Friction, the most useful word in the English language when the truth underneath it involves a man sending surveillance to your parking lot. I sent it at 5:47 a.m. and was in the shower by 6. Chris called at 6:12. "The Don Hyun paragraph," he said, without preamble. "Stays," I said. I had my phone wedged between my shoulder and my ear, still in my robe, pouring coffee I hadn't waited long enough for. "It's 1 paragraph. It's factual. And if he moves before the pitch, it's the paragraph that makes us look ahead of it instead of behind it." Silence. The particular quality of Chris Yoon's silence that meant he was running calculations I wasn't fully cleared to see. "It puts a name to something he doesn't want named," he said finally. It puts a shape to something the aldermen will hear about anyway. I'd rather they hear it in our language. I set down my mug. Chris. He followed me home. He is past the point of subtlety, and you know it. Another silence. Longer. Leave the paragraph, he said. I'll have legal review it by noon. I was in by 9. The brief was open on my screen, the Don Hyun paragraph sitting at the bottom of page for like a quiet grenade. When Chris walked in 40 minutes later with his jacket already off and the expression of a man who had been making difficult phone calls since before the city was fully awake. He read the brief standing up, all 12 pages, without sitting down, without interrupting, without the controlled commentary he usually deployed to remind both of us that he was the client and I was the consultant, and there was a defined geometry to that relationship. When he finished, he set it on the table, looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at me. This is the version that ends it, he said quietly. One way or another. Yes, I said. He crossed the room. Not to the window, not to his chair, to where I was standing at the far end of the table, and he stopped close enough that I was aware of the specific quality of the air between us, which had been a problem for weeks, and was now an acute one. If this goes wrong, he started. It won't. Kendra! My name in his mouth, the way he always said it, like a decision, like something chosen deliberately from a list of available options. If it goes wrong, I need you to be somewhere I can't touch you. I looked up at him. The composure was still there, but the surface of it had thinned in a way I hadn't seen before, the careful architecture of the man, showing its load-bearing walls. He was afraid, not for the company, not for the pitch, the specific fear of someone watching a situation accelerate toward a person they cannot afford to lose. I understood it completely because I had been not naming the same thing for 2 weeks. You hired me to be in the room, I said. I'm staying in the room. He reached out and took the brief from the table with one hand. With the other, very slowly, very deliberately, he removed the pen from where I tucked it at the edge of my portfolio. He signed the bottom of the last page. Then he set the pen down and looked at me, and whatever had been living beneath the surface of 3 weeks of charged silences and almost smiles and first-name moments arrived in the space between us all at once, visible and undeniable and entirely out of time. He kissed me, not gradually, not with the slow diplomacy of a man asking permission. Sudden and certain, the way he made every decision that actually mattered. One hand at the side of my face, the brief still in his other hand, the full weight of 3 weeks landing in a single moment that bypassed every professional wall I had spent a decade constructing and went straight through to something underneath that had been waiting, apparently with considerably more patience than I'd known I had. I kissed him back. That's the part one won't qualify or explain away. I kissed him back with the full force of a woman who had been pretending this wasn't where we were going since the morning he handed me a coffee in the lobby without being asked. He pulled back first. Barely. An inch. His forehead almost against mine, his breath uneven in a way that was enormously satisfying to have caused. I started. Yes, he said. It was. We stood there for a moment in the specific silence of something that cannot be unfiled. Then I picked up the signed brief, smoothed my blazer, and walked back to my end of the table. I'll send this to legal, I said. He watched me with dark, unhurried eyes and the expression of a man who had just crossed a line he'd been standing at for weeks and had absolutely no intention of stepping back over it. Kendra, he said. Later, I said. We have a pitch to save. He sat down, but he was smiling, a real one, not the almost, and it was, as previously noted, devastating. I heard about the gun third. First came the text, Chris, 11:43 p.m., 4 words, don't come in tomorrow. No explanation. No follow-up. The kind of message that is not a suggestion and knows it. Second came Cho Yoon, his head of security, calling my cell at 7:15 a.m. with the careful voice of a man trained to deliver alarming information in the least alarming register possible. There had been an incident at the tower. Overnight, the details were being managed. Mr. Yoon wanted me to work remotely until further notice. What kind of incident, I said. The kind being managed, Cho Yoon said, which was not an answer and we both knew it. I was in my car by 7:30. I want to be clear that I understood this was not a rational decision. I had the argument fully assembled. I was a marketing consultant, not a security asset. The appropriate response to a credible threat was to do exactly what the trained professionals were asking, Chris had resources and personnel specifically designed for moments like this, and my presence would contribute nothing except an additional variable in an already unstable equation. I also understood, somewhere beneath the logic of all that the man who had kissed me with the signed brief, still in his hand 14 hours ago, was currently inside a building with an active security incident, and no one had told me if he was all right. I drove to the tower anyway. The lobby was different. Subtle but legible. 2 additional men near the security desk with the particular stillness of people whose job is to watch doors. The reception energy running 2 degrees tighter than usual. A maintenance crew near the elevators maintaining nothing. I badged in. Cho Yoon met me on 34 with an expression that moved through surprise, resignation, and something that looked almost like relief in approximately 1 second. He said you'd come, Cho Yoon said. Where is he? The office at the end of the hall, not the conference room. His actual office, the one with the closed door and the lake view on clear days, had voices behind it. Low and controlled. The register of men managing something dangerous with language, because the alternative had already been considered and declined. Cho Yoon knocked twice. Opened the door. Chris was at the window. 2 men I didn't know occupied chairs near the desk with the professional blankness of people present for specific reasons. On the desk, inside an evidence bag, was a handgun. He turned when I walked in. The relief hit his face first. Fast and unguarded, a full second before the frustration arrived to cover it. In that second I saw exactly what the night had cost him and exactly what seeing me walk through that door was doing to correct it. I told you not to come, he said. I know, I said. I looked at the gun. Back at him. Let the question exist without asking it. Left in the parking structure overnight, he said. Registered to a name that doesn't exist. A pause that carried weight. With a note attached. What did it say? He looked at me for a moment with those dark eyes that already knew too much, and beneath the composure, underneath every layer of the controlled, precise, dangerous man I had been watching navigate impossible things for 3 weeks, was something raw and unmanaged and entirely focused on me. It had your name on it, he said. Quietly, like the words cost him something to release. The room held its breath. I stood with that, let it land in the correct sequence. Don Hyun's attorney in the lobby yesterday morning. The brief signed and sent. The disclosure framework now officially in motion. The note. He wasn't messaging Chris anymore. He was messaging me, telling me that I had become the pressure point, that I had moved from peripheral to central in his calculation, which meant the strategy was working, and I was now the thing he needed to remove before it did. Something clarified in me then. Cold and absolute and entirely without panic. I set my bag on the nearest chair. I need the full security footage from the last 72 hours, I said. Everything you have on Don Hyun's attorney, clients, filing history, any paper that touches his company. If he's moving through her, there's a trail. I looked at the 2 men in the chairs. And I need the room. They looked at Chris. He nodded once. They left. When the door closed, he crossed to me immediately. No preamble, no performance. Just 3 steps across the room, and his hands on my face and his forehead against mine, the controlled man completely abandoned in favor of whatever this was, whatever we had become in the space between a signed brief and a note with my name on it. You should have stayed home, he said. Low. Rough at the edges in a way I had never heard from him. You know I wasn't going to, I said. I know. His thumbs at my jaw. Eyes closed. I know exactly who you are, Kendra. That's the problem. I pulled back far enough to look at him. The man behind all the composure, tired and frightened and holding my face like I was something he'd already decided he wasn't going to lose. Then stop trying to protect me from the room, I said. Put me to work. A long breath. Then he stepped back, straightened. The composure reassembled itself, but differently now, like a coat worn over something that was no longer hidden underneath. Cho Yoon, he called. The door opened. Get her access to everything, Chris said, his eyes on me, steady and certain, and no longer even slightly interested in pretending. All of it. You just lived inside someone else's heartbreak, someone else's courage, someone else's impossible love story, and it felt personal. That's not an accident. That's what we do here. Every single release, without exception. Subscribe, so you never have to go looking for us again. Hit the bell, so we come to you. And leave a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from, and whether you saw that ending coming, because I need to know if I have to work harder next time.